So as you can see here from the board, we're going to start our lecture series here on World War II. And I kind of like to break World War II up into different sections because it's a little lengthy, it's a little long. So we're going to break it up into kind of the years prior to World War II, or we'll talk about what's going on in countries, primarily Germany, in the wars before the war actually begins. And then we're going to talk about the war in Europe, the war against Germany and Italy. And then we'll talk about the war in the Pacific against Japan. And I like to do that because sometimes if you talk about the war altogether, students kind of get confused. Well, was that in Europe? Was that in the Pacific? So we'll break that up. And then finally, our last topic will be the home front, or what's going on in America during the war. So let's start our first topic off today then, the years prior to World War II. And let's talk a little bit about what Germany was like in the years before the war. So we'll talk about Germany here in the 1930s. And one of the things to remember about Germany, like every other country during this time, they're going through a depression. Now this is the same depression that we were going through in America. We called it the Great Depression. We just finished our study on that. But in Germany and in many other countries, it's much worse even than it is in America. There's more unemployment, there's more businesses failing, there's more homelessness. It's just a lot worse. Now remember what we just went through in our study of the Depression, what people had to experience. Now imagine that being even worse, and you sort of get the picture. Now, one of the things that's really hitting Germany hard is they're suffering from inflation. Now, if you don't know what the word inflation means, that means a rise in prices. That simply means that things are costing more. Bread costs more, housing costs more, gas costs more. You can identify with that. We've experienced a little bit of that here lately. And remember a couple years ago when gas was in the $4 and rumored even to be maybe going into the $5 range, how that impacted your guys' life, how you couldn't maybe do some of the things that you were used to doing. And that's what was happening in Germany. But in Germany it was off the charts inflation, what they call super inflation, where things just exploded in terms of cost. And I'll give you an example. Bread. There's numerous stories of things costing more, but one in particular that I remember is the cost of bread. During the worst part of the Depression in Germany, one loaf of bread cost about an entire month's salary. So you can imagine if you're trying to feed a family in Germany, how that impacts you. And in fact, the money became so worthless in Germany, you'll see a picture of this in your book, that the kids actually made building blocks out of it. They made blocks stacking a bunch of the money together, and it became just something to play with. Sometimes they would decorate their rooms with it, or playhouses, because the money wasn't really worth the paper it was printed on. It just was worthless. So Germany was suffering through this depression and this super inflation, and a lot of this had to deal with those reparation payments that they had to pay as a result of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. You can remember maybe that reparations are payments that the losers of a war have to pay to the winners for the cost. And Germany got saddled with lots of these after World War I, and this was causing a lot of their economic problems. And again, remember, this depression that we studied in America is hitting everyone as well, and Germany even more so. So this is the time where Hitler starts to gain popularity or rise to power. And a lot of the reason is because Hitler gives these speeches and he says, I'm going to give you bread, and I'm going to give you work, and I'm going to restore Germany's glory. And people liked that at the time. Okay? It's very similar to the same things that FDR was saying to the American people during our Depression. And when people are down in the dumps, people that can inspire them, people that are good public speakers, can motivate people. And that's what Hitler was. We'll talk a little bit more about Hitler on our next slide. But Hitler comes along and he promises people, hey, I'm going to restore Germany. Okay, we're going to fix things. Okay, and we're going to make sure that you can feed your family and have a decent living and be proud to be a German. And he says that, I know the cause of all these problems and we're going to fix them. Again, very similar to things like FDR was saying. And because people were desperate, Hitler gains a little bit more popularity than perhaps he would otherwise, because some of the other things he said were pretty far-fetched or pretty radical. But because he's wrapping them up in the message of, I'm going to fix things, I'm going to give you jobs and bread and those kinds of things, people start to listen to him. Now the Nazis are Hitler's political party, so that's what you can write down. A Nazi was someone who supported Hitler. Just like today our political parties are the Republicans or the Democrats. The Nazis is a short for the National German Social Workers' Party. And this was just the name they gave to it because it was catchy, and you know that their symbol was the swastika, perhaps. And this is their political party, and people that supported Hitler were Nazis. One of the things that's kind of interesting about Hitler here is when things are bad, Hitler says that I have the solution, but the Nazis weren't getting a lot of votes yet. They still were not getting put into office. They weren't voting in the elections for a lot of the Nazi candidates. And so what Hitler decided to do was to try to take control of Germany by force. And that's what the word coup means here. C-O-U-P means to take control by force. And this is not an unheard of thing. It happens quite a bit in countries, and it happens in countries today. If there's a lot of fighting in a country and there's no real strong leader, sometimes the leader will emerge and try to overthrow the current government with guns and just by military might. And that's what Hitler tried to do. This is called the Beer Hall Putsch. Okay, that's the German word for it, for a coup. Basically what he did is he gave a big speech in a beer hall, and these are found all over Germany, but basically a bar, saloon, whatever you want to say. He gave a big speech, and his plan was he was going to rally people, and people would come and grab their guns and march through the streets, and as he marched, more and more people would join his cause. And eventually they would march through Germany all the way to the capital of Berlin and just take control of the government through the massive army that he had amassed. Now what happens in reality is when Hitler does this, he doesn't get the support that he expects. And in fact, he is arrested and put in jail. Ironically, however, this actually helps Hitler more than anything else because his trial is a sensation in the country. And when he goes on trial, he makes these very impassioned speeches, and he sort of emerges from this trial as a celebrity. He gains fame and notoriety because of this trial for trying to overthrow the government. Now, normally you would think if that happens, people would be pretty upset and angry, but so many people are listening to this trial on the radio, reading about it in the papers, and they read his speeches, and they're really moved by that. And so this really makes Hitler famous. And even though he's convicted and he has to go to jail for a short time, this makes Hitler famous and well known in Germany, and it's going to start him on the rise. Now, it's when he's in jail then that he writes his famous book called Mein Kampf, which is My Struggle in Germany, in German. And in this book is filled with his ideas or plans for Germany. And basically, he's saying, if I ran things, this is what I would do, this is how I would fix things, and so on and so forth. And this becomes a very popular book, a national bestseller. Lots of people reading it and getting a hold of his ideas. Now, I myself I've tried to read it, but it's filled with a lot of rants, and it's very difficult to follow. Gives you a little insight into Hitler's mind a little bit. But he writes this book in prison, and it also helps him become very famous. And something else to mention about this book, it's in this book that you will see something called anti-Semitism. Now, a Semite is someone that is Jewish or believes of the Jewish faith, and so anti means against. So definition for this would simply be prejudice against Jews or dislike of Jews, hatred of Jews, this sort of thing. And in Mein Kampf, this is where you see lots of this from Hitler. And Hitler, this is where you see him start to blame the Jews. He blames the Jews for the Treaty of Versailles, which has caused all of Germany's problem. He also compares the Jews to communists, who are people who are generally frowned upon in society because communists want to overthrow the government and give away the richest money to the poor and these sort of things. You remember, I'm sure, what communism is. So in Mein Kampf, you see the first ideas of anti-Semitism. He actually really lays out kind of what he plans to do. And he doesn't say, you know, I'm going to have a Holocaust and try to eliminate all the Jews, but he basically says the Jews are the root of the problem. They're what we have to take care of. And page after page, you kind of see all that. All of this helps to gain notoriety for Hitler and put him on the fast track to power, so much so that in 1933 he is elected and given the office of Chancellor of Germany. Now what this simply means is Chancellor is their version of our president or a prime minister. He's their biggest politician. He's going to basically kind of run the show. Now there's still a democracy at the time. He's just going to be the head of the democracy. And a lot of people actually, historians say this, a lot of people said they put Hitler in power because they thought that's, you know, what he would be good at. He'd be good at making these speeches, but behind the scenes we can kind of control him and he'll do what we want, that kind of thing. He just wants to have the title and the fame, and behind the scenes we'll really have the power. Well, they were quite wrong about Hitler, and in fact when he becomes Chancellor, very soon he starts to consolidate his power. He starts to ban other political parties other than the Nazis, and it is not long, in fact, about a year later, then, that he dissolves the German government, gets rid of the democracy, and creates an empire with himself as an absolute dictator. The name of the empire is the Third Reich. This is referring to the third empire in German history, and according to Hitler, it was going to last for 1,000 years. And so this is, if you see the Third Reich, that's a term you'll come across quite a bit when you're studying World War II. That just means Germany's empire with Hitler as a dictator at the top. And so you can see within a year he basically consolidates the power, puts all his buddies, all his fellow Nazis into the important posts of government, and basically is running the control with an absolute dictatorship with his word as law. And as I said, you will see the same sort of things happen in Italy. Japan will be fairly similar. When things get difficult, when people are having tough times, especially tough economic times, they tend to try to give up, well not try, but are willing to give up some of their little freedoms and some of their power in exchange for a little help or a little comfort, these kinds of things. And so you'll see a lot of this going on in other countries during the 1930s as well. But let's take a little closer look. Let's take a little closer look at this question as to why Hitler came to power, because students are often quite interested and fascinated with Hitler, and there is tons of information out there. And I should be honest with you and up front, we don't know a lot of exact things about Hitler because a lot of the records were destroyed. When Hitler came to power, he destroyed a lot of the records and documents and information about him in the years prior to him coming to power. And of course then when the war was over and Germany lost, they destroyed records as well. So there's a lot of information we don't know, so there is some guesswork in Hitler. But if you do want to learn more about him, he is an interesting character. There's a lot of information online, and we'll do some more things in class as well. But why did Hitler come to power? That's a question that a lot of students often ask. And we can't pinpoint it to necessarily one specific thing. We're going to talk about 4 or 5 different things here, and historians disagree a little bit, but we're going to hit on just some basic ideas. Now, if there was perhaps to be one main thing that caused Hitler to come to power, it would probably be the Depression. Hitler comes along at exactly the right moment in history. If there was no Depression, Hitler probably would have gone unnoticed. His ideas were kind of far-fetched and radical, but when people are desperate, they're willing to try just about anything. And when Hitler gives his speeches about work and bread and restoring Germany to glory, it really hits home with a lot of people. And so that really probably is more than anything. We can't say that for certain, of course, but if there's probably one reason he comes to power, It might be he just comes along at exactly the right moment because Germany's suffering through a depression. Certainly, though, number 2 here, being a good public speaker is extremely important as well. Just like FDR, and you'll see there are quite a few similarities between FDR and Hitler. Just like FDR, Hitler has the ability to move people when he speaks. When he speaks, it's again as if he's speaking just to you. He's speaking to you directly. He makes a personal connection. And one of the things that I've read about Hitler that kind of interests me is that a lot of us have maybe gone to some event or something and listened to someone speak and we said, oh, they're a good speaker. And nothing else ever happens. But with Hitler, supposedly he would speak and he had the power to get people to actually do the things that he was saying. He had the power to motivate people to take action. And so he was a very good public speaker, and that also helped him to gain a lot of power as well. 3, here's a vocabulary term again you've heard many, many times, propaganda. If you don't remember, you need to define it again, and you need to learn it. It means one-sided information. Okay? It's like, again, when you are in trouble with your parents or the principal, and they say, okay, tell us what happened. Generally, people kind of give a version of the truth that kind of makes them look like the victim, or they look like the good guys, and the other people the bad guys. That's what propaganda is. And Hitler and his workers, a guy named Joseph Goebbels is the guy that's in charge of that. They are extremely good at it. They're very good at getting out their message that the Nazis are the right way, their way of thinking is the right way, and everyone else is wrong. They're very good at that. They're very good at convincing people that the Nazis and Hitler are the solution to their problems, that they're the good guys and everyone else is the bad guys. So you can imagine how important that is in a political campaign, trying to convince people that you're right. And apparently they're very good. They had good posters. This is in his speeches. This is in the movies that they're going to do. They're really very good at capturing the essence of what the German people wanted and telling them what they wanted to hear. Hitler was very good at that. Now here we see the Treaty of Versailles, which again is the document that ended World War I. And you might remember from our previous study that this treated Germany extremely harshly. And this is important to Hitler coming to power because it's a unifying force. It's something that almost all Germans could agree on. They all thought that the Treaty of Versailles just was too harsh. It was just what ruined Germany. And this is what Hitler's going to rally behind. This is what he's going to use people to come to his cause, because he says, if I'm elected, if I get into power, I'm going to tear this document up because it's an unjust document, it's an unfair document. I'm going to rip it to pieces, and I'm going to restore Germany to glory, to honor. And that's something that everybody kind of agreed with. No matter what walk of life you were from, you kind of said, you know, Germany got the raw end of the deal here. And so it's what brought a lot of people to listen to him and to his side. And then, of course, these other things kind of play into that as well. And the last one, number 5 here, we can't ignore this either. Hitler was not afraid to use violence to get what he wanted. By that, I mean, sometimes if I was running against Hitler, for example, they might show up at my speech and beat me up. Or if people were going to vote for me, if they knew like a particular section of town was going to vote for a different candidate other than a Nazi, they might send people out there on election day to kind of scare people into staying home and not voting. And of course, it also means sometimes he would eliminate people. He would have people killed, whether those were rivals of him in another party or rivals of him within the Nazis themselves. Now, to give you an example of this, Hitler and the Nazis actually had a group. They were called the Brown Shirts, or the SA, and they were members of the Nazi Party, and their specific job was to be like the bouncers, the roughnecks. They were almost like the police or the military of their political party, and their job was to use violence to help the party win, whatever that might be. So they were the ones that kind of intimidated other candidates, did the beatings, and this happened a lot. So Hitler was not afraid to use this to help him win. He was not afraid to win at all costs. So these are all reasons Hitler came to power. There undoubtedly are others, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on. Again, they're all very important, okay? You take away one and all the rest might fail. But if we had to pick one, probably it would be, again, the Depression here, number one. Because Hitler comes along at the right time, and Germany is very desperate for a leader to take charge and to change things around. Again, very similar to the United States. People were desperate in the U.S., and FDR promised them a lot of things too, and they put a lot of faith and trust in him. Okay? That's what happened here with Germany as well. They thought Hitler was the guy. It sounded like he could get things done. He could change things. And so that would probably be the one if we had to guess.